Today I'll be answering the all-important questions such as, is the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC terrible? And is Elden Ring only catering to the self-proclaimed hardcore gamers or streamers and VTubers to die on camera while being kawaii about it? No! I will, to the best of my ability, try to answer all these burning questions and more, while offering my perspective on some of the major touch points of the DLC. But before we do that, we need to do some housekeeping. Firstly, I'll be playing on an older patch of the game, 1.12 to be specific. This was a choice on my part to get the full experience of what the DLC was like at launch, for better or worse. Secondly, I am playing on my new PC, and I use that word loosely because everything in it is second-hand. For those of you who are interested, I'm running a Ryzen 2700 with an RX 574GB to boot. The point is, I've built this PC and I've yet to activate Windows, so this annoying little watermark is going to be there for some of these clips. Thirdly, this video is meant to be entertaining above all, so don't take everything I say too seriously. Lastly, I decided to do a brand new character for this DLC, which meant I had to deal with this guy once more. I don't know about you guys, do you get that nostalgic feeling whenever you see this dude? Seeing the Tree Sentinel after a year was like seeing an old friend or rival that you have the utmost respect for. That is until he hits you with some delayed bullshit, at which point the feeling of disrespect was mutual. I decided to make an example of him by attempting to do a bow only run that would start and end with his death. Believe it or not, I haven't really experimented with bows much in my previous playthroughs. I was surprised to find that they can be extremely effective, especially with the mighty shot Ash of War. Going forward, you'll notice this becomes a staple of my loadout. Anyway, let's skip to the end of the base game, where we fight the Elden Beast. It was at this point where I encountered a new move I've never seen before. I believe this extremely rare move is referred to as the Super Ultimate Hyper Fuck You Double Cheese Deluxe. Like, for real, how am I supposed to avoid all of this? What's even more upsetting is my ability to have a boss one shot and royally fuck it up. I swear it's almost a superpower at this point. Nevertheless, we defeat the Elden Beast and claim the throne as Elden Lord. Thus, we begin the next chapter of our adventure, starting with the Black Jail Knight, quite possibly the most unassuming boss fight of this DLC. Stepping through the fog door and seeing a human-type enemy was deceptively disarming. That is until he one-shots you, imploring you to maybe temper your expectations going forward.
I implore you to reconsider.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure at this point of the game you're meant to explore and find new Shadow Tree fragments before fighting him. For those of you who don't know, these items increase your attack and defense percentage while in the DLC area. But me, being the stubborn jackass that I am, would rather bash my head against the wall until it breaks. And that's exactly what it did. For this video, I wanted to try something new. I thought it'd be fun to go over some interesting takes I found on the game's Steam page and pepper them into the video. Our first one reads, "This game is hugely overrated. The only reason why this DLC has such good reviews is that only the ignorant fanboys who are obsessed with the base game bought it. No one else did. This doesn't account for the thousands of other players who bought the game and quit playing it." Is someone gonna tell this guy that, yeah, fans of the base game are gonna buy it? If you really like something, you're gonna want more of it. And saying no one else bought it, I don't know about that. The numbers say otherwise. My favorite part of this comment is how they claim that the review score doesn't account for thousands who jumped off the game. You know why those people aren't commenting on Elden Ring? Because they're f***ing playing something else. Why would you stick around for something you don't really find interesting? This comment to me sounds like someone who couldn't defeat Margaret and is now jealous that some of us are having fun with the game. Just a side note to the commenter, I want to let you in on a little secret. I played Red Dead Redemption 2, and after a few hours, I jumped off. I know, shocker, right? I'm just not really into cowboys and westerns. And even though I bounced off, I still watched my brother play it and really enjoyed watching. And guess what? If a DLC for Red Dead 2 ever came out, you know who would play it and probably leave a positive review for it? Not me. Alright, moving on. It is around this time when I got my hands on what would become my new love, the Great Katana. But before we can put it to use, we're gonna have to upgrade it. To do that, we head back to the Palace Approach. This has to be my favorite farming spot, but I gotta admit, I feel terrible every time I complete a run here. I feel like From Software knew what they were doing when they created this area. Yeah, you can get an easy 30k souls, but do you have the heart to follow through what you're about to do? Poor guys just want to have a nap, man. So with our Great Katana upgraded, it's time to take on the Ghost Flame Dragon. Now this is one of the few areas where I think From has dropped the ball just a bit. Up to this point, we've been through at least a dozen dragons from the base game, and seeing another dragon mini-boss was a bit disappointing. Yeah, it's a new variation of dragon, but it's pretty much the same thing we've seen time and time again, albeit with a slightly altered moveset. FromSoft has clearly reused some of the assets from the main game, and I noticed a few people has an issue with that. Personally, I don't mind reusing dragons and a few enemies. Yeah, I would have loved for them to include completely new enemy types, but I understand that maybe they had to cut a few corners to get this game out when they did. Remember, it's only been 2 years and some change since Elden Ring released, and what they've managed to conjure up since then is truly impressive. I want to bet that the scale of this DLC goes beyond what most of us ever imagined, so I don't really mind that they reuse an enemy or two. But anyway, getting back to the dragon, I still think its design is really cool, and the fight was for the most part fairly straightforward. Also, I want to point out that the Flame Strike Ash of War on the Great Katana is so sick. There's just something about flaming swords that rub me the right way, you know? Also, let me know in the comments, what other Ashes of War works well on this weapon. Next up, it was time to face our first major boss of this DLC. But to do that, we had to make our way through the town of Balurat. Balurat. A task that seems surmountable, up until this guy stepped into the picture. Anyone else thinks this guy is just a tad bit ridiculous? He doesn't stumble, he doesn't let up, and he hits like a truck. So I didn't feel too bad cheesing him any way I could. We finally make it to the stage front and the message becomes perfectly clear. I'm not beating this guy right now. So, I attempt to storm a nearby castle in search of those sweet Erdtree fragments to hopefully even the playing field. Instead, I get stuck playing Marco Polo with teleporting geriatrics. I gotta be honest with you guys, getting bullied by these shifty senile sorcerers kinda got under my skin. Eventually, through sheer perseverance and a few well-placed arrows, we are finally past the gauntlet of annoying magic-wielding enemies.
Are you sure about that?
I had to employ the old hit and run tactic to deal with this one. It's quite a simple maneuver in which you run around like a headless chicken for most of the fight while you pep in a single counter attack every 10 seconds or so. Really effective strategy, you should give it a try. After clearing the castle, it was now time to take on the big boss. And waiting in the boss room for us was Rellana. Twin Moon Knight? Wow, great naming convention there from Software. Look, I'm pretty sure there's some lore video out there explaining the connection between Rellana and Rellana, but from a less informed standpoint, it sounds stupid. I attempted the fight about a dozen times and even got to the second phase once or twice. But once again, something was made perfectly clear. It wasn't happening this time. So once more, with my tail tucked between my legs, I decided to come back at a later stage and headed for Dragon Mountain. It's definitely not called Dragon Mountain, but the name escapes me right now and Dragon Mountain seems rather appropriate, considering it's full of dragons. Wow, great naming convention there from Software. Up first was a Jagged Peak Drake, which I swiftly dispatched using my shiny new Dragon Hunter's Katana. After that, I bore witness to a spectacle that actually made me stop in my tracks and say, whoa. Elden Ring is so good at doing this, making the player stop in amazement. The fact that the DLC still manages to do this is genuinely so impressive, even after all the hype. Going into the DLC, I knew I had to temper my expectations because I felt that there was no way they would be able to recapture those moments in the base game. But they did. And then, it is back to fighting another ancient dragon that we've seen a million times. Alright, it's been a while since we had a spicy take, and strap yourselves in, because this one's a bit of a doozy. Actually, hold on, let me do this. Okay, much better. This one reads, look, I like this game, and I like the DLC. It's pretty obvious from my hours. Elden Ring is a game I can always play offhand while waiting for the next release on my wishlist. That being said, the game has balance deficiencies, and the DLC especially has terrible issues. And the issues mostly are from Software's new idea of what it means to be difficult. Spam attacks, delay attacks, undodgeable AoEs, large bosses that have no right to be as fast as they are from their size. Whatever frustrating thing you can imagine, this DLC has it. I'm a huge fan. I like the world, lore, characters, it all sucks you in. But I also acknowledge that this is a new low point for From Software in terms of game design. The formula has been absolutely bled dry for everything it's worth. It's a sad reality. I'm a huge fan of this world, but even I can't ignore this objective truth. It's even sadder because Sekiro was an evolution to the formula, and it got completely sidelined, abandoned, and forgotten. From did a lot of innovation with Sekiro. Unfortunately, they seem to have abandoned the experiment. Now, all they seem to be doing lately, especially with Elden Ring, is catering to an audience of self-proclaimed hardcore gamers, or as some like to call them, get-gooders. And they are implementing difficulty for difficulty's sake, not because of context, but because they just see it as a marketable product, something for the streamers and VTubers to die on camera while being kawaii about it. Alright, quite a bit to unpack there, but let's begin with the first paragraph. Their main issue with this DLC is the difficulty spike in boss fights, claiming FromSoft's new approach to difficulty is a step too far. Here's what I think, and I'm going to talk in the broad sense of difficulty, not just boss fights. Balancing this DLC was always going to be a huge undertaking for the developers, and the solution they came up with is probably the best way they could have done this. Having this Erdtree fragment system acts as a kind of reset for everyone coming into the DLC. All of a sudden, levels don't mean as much anymore. This allows FromSoft to control the progression of the player through means of bosses who will gatekeep you. If a boss is giving you trouble, you're encouraged to explore and find more fragments, then return when you are stronger. I've noticed that a lot of people are not happy with the system, but if you think about it, progressing through the base game was almost exactly the same loop. Remember fighting Margit or even Godric for the first time, getting absolutely wrecked and then leaving to grind for a bit and returning once more once you're strong enough. It's the same thing, and in my opinion, a clever way of emulating level progression. Please let me know in the comments, if you can change a system, what would you do to change it? And also, how would you stop players with overpowered bolts steamrolling the DLC in 2 hours? I'm curious to know. Speaking about bosses specifically, are they hard? Yes, but not ridiculous. I still consider them hard but fair. Yes, they have spam attacks, yes, they delay their attacks, and yes, they have very small punish windows. But that's the way it has to be. Players have come to expect a certain level of difficulty when it comes to FromSoft games. If the bosses in this DLC were as easy to defeat as the ones in the base game, I personally would have been disappointed, and I'm sure most fans would be too. The way I see it, Elden Ring was already kinda easy if you ask me. I would argue it's one of the easiest FromSoft games out there. But, and that's a big but, that difficulty purely depends on the player. There are so many tools in the base game that can trivialize almost any boss. Things like consumables, summons, and simple exploits can turn even the hardest boss into a walk in the park. This is gonna sound a bit mean, but I've seen some players who are terrible at the game persevere because they use the tools available to them. Simple ingenuity is enough to get you through the base game. The DLC, on the other hand, in my opinion, places a bigger emphasis on player skill. Specifically, I'm talking about survivability. These bosses come at you hard and fast, so you can't just summon Mimic Tier and stand by while they do all the work. These bosses are unrelenting and deal a crap ton of damage, so it is imperative that you learn their attack patterns and learn how to avoid taking damage. As someone who deeply enjoys that kind of thing, I believe this DLC, including the difficulty spike, is a love letter to fans of the game. The poster goes on to say how they appreciate the world building aspect, but at the same time, believes game design is objectively at an all-time low. Firstly, everyone is entitled to their own opinion. You are allowed to say the game design is bad, but going around saying it is objectively bad is objectively wrong. You can, however, say subjectively that the game design is terrible because that is how you feel about it. Personally, I think FromSoft has never looked stronger. This DLC feels like Elden Ring on crack. The bosses are crazier, the new explorable areas are so much more creative and distinct, not to mention the sheer amount of verticality added to these new areas makes hunting for secrets even more fun. As a result, exploration was an absolute treat. Searching high and low for hidden pathways and secret hidey holes was extremely rewarding. My only nitpick here is like sometimes finding useless items like low level crafting items. At this point, we've got all the crafting items we need. Alright, onto the third and final part of this post, and this is my favorite part, because the writer claims Elden Ring caters to not only the hardcore gamers, but the streamers and VTubers to quote, die on camera while being kawaii about it. Now I'm not sure I understand what the f that even means, but watching someone else die over and over without making any progress sounds extremely boring to me. That statement says more about you and your interests more than it does about the gaming community. Sounds like maybe a VTuber hurt you in the past by skipping over your donation during a stream, and now you're taking out your frustration on this Elden Ring DLC review. Either way, trust me, that's not their target audience. Look, as much as I made fun of this review, I do agree with a few of their points. Yes, the bosses are borderline ridiculous, but I would argue that's the point. Yes, there's definitely untapped potential with the Sekiro IP, and I feel like a sequel or spiritual successor is inevitable. And yes, From is catering to the so-called hardcore gamers, but saying the base game did so is incorrect. Elden Ring has been the most mainstream game they have made to date, by going open world and giving the player tools that make the game more accessible from a difficulty standpoint. So when we last left off, our hero was staring down the throat of a belligerent winged lizard, and after successfully failing my task here, I slunk away once more with my tail tucked between my legs. But even though we failed down the ancient dragon, the fragments we acquired along the way would prove to be just enough to go toe to toe with the roll catch queen, Relana. I went through so many weapon and gear combos in the learning phase of this fight. This is my process, by the way. I like to go in with just my sword and shield, no buffs or items beyond what I have equipped on my character, and just learn the boss's attack patterns. I know a lot of players like to do their pre-game rituals at the entrance to the boss rooms, applying every buff known to man and simply melting anything waiting for them beyond that fog door with a bleed or frostbite dual wield katana bolt. While I do find that impressive, the highlight of Souls games for me are the boss fights, so I try to make them last as long as I can, sometimes even using weaker weapons to make them last longer. But Lady Relana, being the strong independent woman that she is, laughs in my face when I claim I'm holding back. So I attempt to contact someone who is experienced in beating strong independent women. Turns out Chris Brown is a hard man to get a hold of. Plus I bet he just recommended a bare fist run, which I wasn't prepared to do. Okay, that one was a bit dark, but seriously f*** that guy. Jokes aside though, this boss was an absolute treat. Probably my favorite boss fight from Elden Ring up to this point. That back and forth dance with the boss is what I live for, and she had it in spades. Oh, and I gotta give special mention to the Milady light greatsword, which carried me through this boss fight. Such a dope moveset, but unfortunately still plays second fiddle to my great katana. It took about an hour, but eventually I managed to down the big goal.
Yes! Woo!
With my newfound confidence, I decided to try my hand at the giant wicker man once more. This time around, I wasn't getting one-shotted by his flaming free kicks, which was nice. If there's one thing I can say about this mini-boss, is that it goes on a bit too long. It's not really hard, he's only got about 3 different attacks, but he's got a crap ton of health, and this fight is kinda boring if I'm honest. Finally, it was time for the showdown. Divine Beast Dancing Lion. What an awesome concept for a boss. While not as enjoyable as the Rolana fight, still a really fun one to learn, and tougher in my opinion. The hardest part of the fight was the boss's passive ability that slows your frames to a crawl at crucial moments and fucking with your timing. Seriously, that combined with the camera, which I'm convinced has a mind of its own, made up close combat a bit of a headache, to put it lightly. But once I figured out the correct zoning, this fight became more manageable, with a few attempts getting upsettingly close. But then, after 2 hours of straight deaths, this happened. No, 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 no. Ha! You thought I was gonna beat him. But you seem to have forgotten about my superpower of leaving a boss one shot. Fret not though, the run after this would be the one. I'm gonna leave you with the end of this one so you can see how things shook out. I want to thank you if you made it this far, and I hope this video brought you some sort of entertainment. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.
Come on! Yes!